Good morning, everybody. This is Marty Knaus with TFP, and this is another session of TFP Expert Discussion. Today, we are going to discuss winterizing your pool. Winterizing is a process for in-ground and above-ground pools in the northern areas of the U.S. and other countries, where you do certain things so that you do not have damage due to freezing conditions where your pool actually freezes. We did do a session earlier this month for just those kind of pools in areas that don't really freeze but might freeze. So I suggest if you have one of those kind of situations, you go ahead and look at that video. Today, joining me is Kurt Bowman, also known as Be More Swim on the forum. Also Jonathan. He's Jay Seifert III on the forum, and Dominic, he's Catanzaro on the forum. Alan, AJW22, may come in later, and we'll see, but regardless, we'll get started. First, we're going to go over pre-closing prep. Pre-closing prep includes things like what equipment you're going to need, what kind of chemistry adjustments you're going to want to do, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll get started there. As far as equipment needed, Dominic, you've got a pretty good round of pieces of equipment for your in-ground pool. Can you give us some items that people should be considering they would need for closing process?
Sure. Okay, so I'll take the lead here. So a couple of things that I always recommend to people when they close their pool is, one, you're going to need some sort of air compressor or a professional pool blower, mainly called a Cyclone. In one of my threads, you'll see pictures of the Cyclone. Air compressor is hooked up with a hose to either through the pump basket through what is called an NPT fitting. So that's something that we can show pictures as well. In addition, you should always have, and I have a few notes here, is a couple bins specifically for pool closings. Keep all your winter plugs and small items in shoe boxes, label them accordingly, keep small extra screwdrivers, pliers, etc. in there as well. There's nothing worse than going to close a pool and then you realize as you're clearing the lines, clearing the main drain, that you're missing something. Okay, so it's always good to have your own pool closing supplies in a bin. Also, you should have extra winter plugs on hand. That is very important. I cannot emphasize that, because sometimes what you'll find is that you'll install a winter plug and it will leak. You'll tighten it a little bit more and the leak is still there, okay? Because there's a lot of air volume behind these winter plugs in the lines. The worst thing you can do is tighten it so much that you snap the plastic wing nut, and then you have to stop, and it could take you up to 30 to 45 minutes to actually remove that. And it is very difficult. I've been through this, okay, as a newbie. So best thing you could do is back off the old plug, discard it, and get yourself a new winter plug, whether it's a number 10, whether it's a number 9, number 11. That doesn't make a difference, okay? Closing
Hey, Dominic.
Yes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So you mentioned that the plug could be leaking. How would you know a plug is leaking as you're putting it in?
Okay, once you install a plug, remember the air compressor, the Cyclone continues to move air through the system. When the air compressor is turned on or the Cyclone is turned on, air is going to move through the volume. It's going to travel to the path of least resistance. Okay, it's going to clear out the first return line, then the second, then the third, and so on and so forth. As you install a plug, okay, you're probably not going to know until you get towards the second, the third, or the fourth plug. There's going to be little air bubbles that are going to be coming out from the outside of the plug. Usually the reason behind all this is because the plug is either not flush, or it's not in all the way, or it's not tightened all the way. Sometimes it just takes a few turns of the wing nut to tighten it, okay? Again, the one mistake you don't want to make is that you over tighten it and it creates problems, okay? If you keep tightening and it's really just, you know, you're cranking the wing nut and it becomes really hard to tighten it, back it off. Just back it off, take that plug out of there. Air is going to come out, very little water is going to come in, put a new plug in. Does that make sense?
Great.
You'll see air bubbles all the way around.
Great, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Getting back to this is closing the swimming pool is nothing more than using air volume to remove water in the lines and then closing them either with a winter plug, which is usually your return lines, a gizmo or a winter plug for your skimmers, or creating what is called an airlock for the main drain. There are certain areas of a pool and certain designs that you cannot plug. For example, a spillover spot. They have suction side. That is another airlock that you're creating. Okay, so the airlock is where you're actually closing the valve to the line and it locks the air in the line. When you create an airlock, you need to make sure that you shut off the air compressor or the cyclone within seconds, not to create backup pressure. Okay, that is through your main drain. So technically, when you're closing out the main drain, and Marty will show you some videos of bubbling effect, and you'll have a whirlpool of an effect when you're closing the main drain because it's going to bubble to the surface. No more than 30 seconds, especially if you're using the cyclone because it's a powerful machine. It's not pressure, it's air volume. You close the valve, you'll see no more bubbles coming from the main drain, and then you shut off the air compressor. Okay? In the winter, also, air will condense just like a car tire when it gets cold. Okay? And in the spring, it'll increase. Remember one thing, even some of these shutoff valves with the main drain, they're not 100% airtight. So one of the things that you could do is you can take a winter plug, go back into the pump housing basket, okay, which I'll show you here through this, is you come in here, okay, and this is your suction line. You can take a winter plug and you can plug it in here and it creates more of an airlock, okay? So you would want that as well. So that's my little gadget over there. And that's really it in a nutshell when it comes to, you know, getting set up for this. Now, anybody have any questions?
Okay. Yeah, let's go ahead. But Dominic, we'll just move forward then with chemistry adjustment. So that's one of the things you would do prior to closing day, correct? Is to do any of your adjustments to your chemistry, correct?
Yeah, yes, I'll interject. So what I usually do about a week before closing, I will bring the pool up to shock level, slam level, of course, based on your CYA, because we all understand chemistry here. If anybody's not familiar with that, please go to the Trouble-Free Pool Forum and learn a little bit about that through some of the articles. And I don't put any more chlorine in. I allow the levels to come down. And then the day before closing, I will test the water again and I will bring it back up to shock level. I used to use algicide. I no longer use algicide because I find that chlorine is sufficient enough in the pool. Okay. A couple other minor things too is if you have a salt cell and you have a dummy cell, which you know most of the people have today, is to swap out your salt cell for the dummy cell while you're doing this, because at the end of the day, you're not going to need your salt cell anymore. You're going to be using straight liquid chlorine. And that's basically it.
What about pH, Dominic? Do you adjust pH at all?
Usually my pH is pretty good, but for my pool, because I have a solid tarp, I actually bring the pH up to about 7.8. Because what I find is that the pool doesn't breathe in the winter and my pH drops significantly, okay? Before closing, a couple other things that I've changed over the years. I used to lower the water below the skimmers about 1 inch. So I don't get wet. I no longer do that because what I find is that I lose water through the winter for evaporation. So now I keep the water level, you know, at the normal level, and I just close it with, you know, water in the skimmer baskets. As long as you're removing the air, you can get the gizmos in there.
Hey, Kurt, you have a plaster pool. Do you adjust pH, TA, those kind of things? One of the main questions, why I'm bringing this up, one of the questions is they're hearing about the correct levels for chlorine, pH, TA for those of us in the northern parts, and do you check it during the winter months? Just give me your impression from a plaster pool owner.
Sure. So I do adjust pH. My pH generally tends to rise. Just my pool in general rises to about 8.2, low, very low 8s just in general. during the winter with cold water. The number gets much higher, but there's I don't check it in the winter anymore as far as the pH goes, but I do lower it because I know it rises due to temperature as well. I will lower mine to about 7.2 to begin. I kind of get on the low end of the scale, the low end of the good range, and that gives me more leeway as it rises over the winter.
So you look at that from a CSI standpoint, or just from a?
I just, as long as I'm in a good CSI range to begin with, so I'll tend to go below, probably a little below range on CSI. I just take it down to 7.2 because I'll always need 1.5 gallons, which is probably, or at least 1 gallon, 1.5 gallons, which is 3 or 4 times my normal pH or normal muriatic acid addition on a maintenance basis in the spring to get it in range. So I know it's risen significantly. I'm sure it's into the 8s, probably even the mid 8s when I opened my pool around the 1st of April. So the only thing other than chlorine, I follow, as Dominic does, a very similar process with raising the SLAM level a week ahead, kind of give it a good cleansing, do it right before, let it drop down just a little bit, dump the water in my lawn. I do dump it down out of the, my pool gets lowered with the tile and the plaster. So I'm lowering the water. But the only other thing I check is pH. Because before that, I'm already in a good, all my chemistry is already lined up well before then anyway. So I'm only lowering pH and raising FC. I also don't use algicide.
Great. Hey, Jonathan, what about on your above ground pool? Do you do any chemistry adjustments?
The only thing for me was just maintaining the chlorine. Obviously, I kept the pH within range, but with the vinyl above ground pool, I don't have to worry about the CSI aspect of closing.
Okay, great, fantastic. So the next subject would be water temperature, and this should be pretty straightforward. I'm assuming you all wait until your water is fairly below 60 degrees Fahrenheit before you start the process. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. So a couple things over here in New Jersey, depending on, your landscape and the trees that you have, your pool could just turn into a maintenance problem from all the leaves being dumped in and so on and so forth. So what I've been recommending to people is, like, I don't close my pool late anymore. When I open it up, it's early in the spring to, get a good head start. I have a solid tarp that makes a huge difference in sunlight underneath. So I'll close my pool probably the 2nd or the 3rd week of September, and I've never had an issue with any algae in the spring. However, what I do recommend to people who have a mesh cover, safety cover, which most people do, is to actually take either a large solid tarp just for the months of September, October, and November. Once you get into the, the water gets below a certain temperature, and cover the pool as well, secure the tarps or the tarp and keep the sunlight out. And that makes a very, very big difference. I have a friend that has had algae problems for the last 12 years, closes the pool. He pays a pool company. Every spring he opens the pool near their summer, and it's a green swampy mess. Last year, he purchased these very inexpensive tarps from Walmart, not even one large tarp, very inexpensive. He covered the pool up, secured them. He opened the pool with his 2 children, through FaceTime, because I guided him this year. And he said that it only took him a day to clear up the pool instead of usually 10 to 14 days, which is a huge difference just by having those tarps over there.
So essentially, you're balancing the temperature of the water with the potential for debris from tree fall, leaf fall, essentially, right? So
Yes.
everybody's got to look at that differently, right? Because the general consensus on the forum is that to wait until your water is below 60 degrees Fahrenheit. But there may be extenuating circumstances, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yes, absolutely. I recommend to people to wait as long as they can before they close their pool, because most people who close their pools, whether they do it on their own or they hire a pool company, their chemistry is off. We clearly know that their combined chlorine is probably high. We clearly know that their chemistry is off. and your pool wasn't clean to begin with. So by you closing it early, you're just creating more of a problem in the spring.
Great,
Okay.
great. Any differences, Kurt and/or Jonathan?
For me, I have an automatic cover, so I'm able to kind of eliminate the leaf and the leaf issue. So, and my dogs like to swim as late as possible. So I keep the pool open until about November 1st. And by then it's, we're starting to get some pretty cool temperatures. I'm definitely below 60 by November 1st. But that being said, my leaf environment is increasing over the years, and I'm thankful to have the automatic cover that really does, to Dominic's point, help me get to that point very easily. It actually helps in the spring also with the pollen season. I can keep that automatic cover on. I can open up April 1st. I don't give a second thought to pollen because I just keep it closed when I'm not using it until it's warmed up.
Great. Jonathan?
Yes, I'm still relatively new to this, and I went without a cover this past winter, which is a little bit different. And if you do that, you have to go late and keep the leaves out. You have to keep netting the leaves out of the pool and keep the chlorine up, or else you will end up with a green pool.
All right, well, great. Any other items we need to cover before we jump to the actual processes of closing? Just let me know if there's something else you want to speak about. Go ahead.
There's one, Marty, there's one minor thing. What people could do, especially if you have a solid tarp, okay? You can actually back off the tarp, and if you really wanted to in the winter, just to protect, the chlorine level, you can actually slowly pour some chlorine on your steps, liquid chlorine, but you will need an air compressor or the cyclone, and you can blow water through the system. Just, keep moving water around just to kind of like mix it properly if you really wanted to. But again, you would have to have a solid tarp. You'd have to have the cyclone, and on top of that, you would have to go out and do this. Most people just close their pools and kind of forget about everything.
Okay, well, let's jump to the actual closing methods, and we'll start with the in-ground. And this is the point where Dominic will let me know when to show some of these pictures and/or videos. First, we'll start, I'm assuming I've got this list and you all looked at it. We'll start with the water level. And what do you all do with your water levels? Go ahead, Dominic, on a vinyl.
Okay, as I mentioned previously, I used to drain the water level below the skimmer, and as I found, I had a lot of evaporation. So now I no longer do that. I keep the water level about halfway on the skimmers, and I close the pool just like that. It is your preference whether you want to lower the water or whether you want to leave it there. It's all about how much you want to get soaked when you're putting the gizmos in, the skimmers. And now a lot of older pools don't have threaded piping, so you're going to need to use a winter plug. If you use a winter plug, just please make sure that you put some sort of foam rope in there just for expansion, or a jug with antifreeze or bleach, et cetera, in the skimmer basket.
And define, you have a vinyl liner pool, because we just got a question about what water level would you recommend at closing for a in-ground vinyl liner using a mesh safety cover? So you're saying you probably would not lower it?
No, for a mesh safety cover, absolutely, I would lower it, because you're going to be getting a lot of rain, which is going to bring up the water level.
All right, so there's the differences in between.
There's a difference. For a solid tarp, you're going to have a lot of evaporation, because the water temperature is going to actually be warmer and colder than the air temperature. So there's going to be a lot of evaporation. What I actually do through the winter, which is a little bit of work, is I remove a lot of the leaves. The water will sit on top of the cover, and I'll actually pump some of the water back underneath, but I do pour bleach on the water. Number one, just to get rid of any algae. And number two is I will actually mix it with a little bit of borax to raise the pH of the rainwater.
Okay.
So then I'll pump it back underneath. And as the water level decreases, guess what? Now I'm bringing it back up. So in the spring, my water level is almost near perfect. And that happens a couple times during the course of the year.
Okay. Kurt, where does your water level get dropped to?
So I have a gunite pool, a concrete pool, which would apply for anyone with any pebble finishes or quartz finishes as well. And I lower the water level. The key with a gunite or a concrete pool is to keep the water off of the tile, below the tile. I'd keep it at all times. You want to keep it at least a couple of inches below the tile, because the water, when the ice forms, it can get on the tile surface, and it's so much more likely to pop tiles off of your pool. And even if it's within an inch or so, or inch or two of the pool, you get that wicking on the through the plaster, and you're still getting water up in the neighborhood of the bottom of the tile, and you can get those tiles popping off. So I lower mine. Mine goes down about 16 inches, and I have a mesh cover during the winter. I do not use my auto cover during the winter. I lower mine about 16 inches. And my lowering point is defined by my automatic cover. I'm sorry, by my safety cover, by my mesh safety cover. The manufacturers will all suggest a maximum amount of water, a maximum depth between the top of the coping and the water surface. And that's because the springs only have so much. The springs are actually compressing the way the design is. So the springs compress as the cover drops when the snow falls. So there's only so much give in there. And if you use up all of that spring compression, then what you're doing is you're putting pressure on the straps and the cover itself. And that could lead to cover failure if you had a significant snow and you had your water level too low.
Great, great. And just for reference, everybody, we're going to do the above ground after we do all the in ground. So we'll step through all the processes on in ground and then jump to above ground. So Jonathan, don't go to sleep. Now the next step, I'm assuming, would be blowing out your lines and plugging the lines. So since Dominic does that process himself, let's have him go ahead and give us a rundown on that. Time check, we're about 23 minutes into our 1 hour commitment.
Okay, thank you, Marty. But before I start, a couple things that you're going to need to do is, one, you're going to need to remove your handrail if you have a handrail near the steps. And two is your ladder. Now, one of the things I've learned, and it's taken a few years, your ladders may become difficult, or your ladder may become difficult to remove. We use a little bit of hot water to kind of loosen up the ladder. One of the things that I've also learned is that what you can do is you can technically go underwater with a tool set and loosen the bolts for the ladder on all 3 steps to give it some flexibility, and not to remove them all completely, but that will help you jiggle the ladder and get it out of there. Okay, and then once you get it out of there, then what you could do is you can tighten them up and store the ladder away. Okay, so now a couple things. The first step before you, as you're starting this, is to get all your winter plugs and everything ready. You can do a few things. You can keep them all in one little box or one little plastic bag. And then as you go around the pool, you can take one out at a time. Or what you could do is you can go around the pool and put the winter plugs, the gizmos, and anything else you need exactly in the location that you need it. Okay. Then the next step is to take your cyclone and get it ready for clearing the lines and or the air compressor. So Marty, while we're doing this now, is if you just want to post one of the pictures up of what the cyclone looks like with the modified pump cover. Okay. I would recommend that.
All right. You can keep talking and I'll just.
Okay. Now, before you start doing this, a couple things that you want to do is, now there's many ways to do this. So a couple things you can do is, one, you can keep the multi-port valve, if you have one, either on recirculate or on filter. I put my multi-port on recirculate. Okay. If you want, you can actually isolate the skimmers and the suction, that is the suction area versus the return area. So what that would mean is that you would go out and you would actually close off your main drain and your skimmers and clear out your lines on the returns first and foremost. So as you can see here, here's a picture of the cyclone with the 3-foot hose that is attached to the modified cover for the Hayward pump. Okay. So if you're closing the pool by yourself and you have absolutely no help, what you could do is you can leave all the lines wide open. And then what's going to happen is that when you turn on your cyclone, the return lines are going to start clearing out first. I have 8 returns in my pool. So I will go in and I will start closing the first return, the second return, all the way to the 8th return. And once all the returns are closed, the next items that are going to clear are your skimmers. You're going to close your skimmers with either the gizmos or a winter plug. And once you're done closing the 2 skimmers, the next area that it's going to clear out is you're going to the main drain, excuse me. You're going to see the main drain bubbling. Then you have plenty of time to get back to the equipment pad. And then what you do is you take your main drain shutoff valve and you close it. You'll see the bubbling effect of your main drain stop. Now, Marty, you should have a video that shows the main drain bubbling, I think.
Okay, do you want the main drain or do you want to start with the cyclone and skin on?
Well, let's start with the cyclone and, you know, show the skimmers blowing out and show some of the return lines first and foremost. You can turn that on.
See that?
Yes. That may be one of the, is that the picture or is that the video?
That's the video of the cyclone.
Okay, because I'm not hearing any volume.
Yeah, I don't know about that part.
Okay, that's fine. So the cyclone now is pushing air through the system. Okay, that's your cyclone. If you want to show just the bubbling effect. So this is what's happening with the skimmer, which of course, you know, you can isolate the skimmers and the returns, or eventually you'll get to the skimmers. Let the lines clear out. And as you can see here, I didn't lower the water with my friend's pool. So you can see that the bubbling effect, let it go for about 30, 40 seconds. When you see this bubbling, you can be rest assured that you've removed most of the water in the line. Then you have to go in and you have to put the gizmo or the winter plug in there. Now, that is the winter plug that's in the skimmer, as you can see from the video. And this type of gizmo, gizmo, that is the gizmo. And this type of gizmo has what is called a blow-through plug in there, where it's actually just removing any excess water, okay, which is above the water line. Now, you can see the returns bubbling over here. And as you close the first return, then the next return will bubble. But here, we're just having one return. That's another return on the other line. The one thing I'll add, Marty, and everyone else here, is that if you're closing your own pool, what you could do, which makes your life a lot easier, is if you want to put on, you know, goggles as you were swimming, you can actually stick your head in the water, not your whole head, just to see what you're working with. So you can place the winter plug flush and tighten it. And you can actually see if you have a leak with air bubbles. Okay? Okay, so I think you pretty much went through all the videos, right, Marty?
One more.
Okay, now this is your main drain. You can see that it's creating a whirlpool effect. Okay, right now there is no water in the main drain line because this is the cyclone that's being used, and as you can see, it's very powerful as far as air volume goes. The cyclone probably produces about 205 to 225 miles per hour of air volume, or its equivalent. So it's pretty, and there's only about 5 pounds of pressure. So you could be rest assured that you're not going to be doing any damage to any of your plumbing. Okay. And what you want to do is you want to go back, make sure you understand where your main drain line is. So as you close your shutoff valve, that bubbling effect will stop.
I just had a question. Would you go ahead and get new plugs every year?
The plugs usually last about 2 years. I would have backup plugs, as I mentioned before, because if you're tightening these and you're really tightening them hard and it's not sealing, guess what? You're either not flush with the plug or the plug's bad. If you're not flush, take it out, discard it, put a new plug in. You don't need to clear the lines out again. You can just put the plug in. One of the things I found is that while you're using the cyclone, the plugs sometimes there's a lot of resistance from the air volume from the cyclone. So one of the things you can do, and this is something that I'm going to be testing this year, and I'll actually take some videos and we'll upload them to the forum, is I'm going to be hooking up my air compressor through the NPT fitting, which I'll show you here. There's a little winter plug right here, if you can see that. You remove this plug right here, and this is where you put what is called an NPT fitting, and that's where you want to hook up your air compressor as well. Keep the pressure of the air compressor at about 15, maybe even 10, because once you clear the water out with the cyclone, you can literally shut off the cyclone and turn on the air compressor, because the water in the lines have been cleared, and the air compressor doesn't have the same volume as a cyclone. So you'll be able to go back and you're not going to have that force of the cyclone in the air pushing that plug out. So you'll be able to take your time, put a new winter plug in, get it snug, get it flush, tighten it accordingly, okay? And another thing that I'm trying to do, and I'll come back to the modified cover, is I'm going to go to the, one of these plumbing stores where I'm going to take this top part off, and I'm going to create a shutoff valve, a shutoff valve up here, which I'll upload pictures, where this is going to be in the top. So when you're done with the cyclone, you don't have to remove it. You can just shut off this. Then the air compressor turns on, and it's not going to push air back towards the cyclone. It's going to go back into the pool. I didn't get a chance to do this, but I will eventually get to that.
What about a main drain that's plumbed to a skimmer? That's before we get off of the blowout line section here. Person just posted that up.
I'm sorry.
For a main drain that's plumbed to a skimmer.
Main drain that's plumbed to a skimmer, you're going to have, if you don't have a way to work and remove water with air from the equipment pad or plumbing, there's a lot of different designs. What you're going to have to do is you're going to have to work with the main drain. I'm sorry, the skimmer area. So you're going to have to go into the skimmer, and you're either going to have to create some sort of adapter to push air through it, or even better yet, there are what they call blow-through plugs. That is in my thread of the concept of closing an in-ground swimming pool. What I would recommend is for that area, use those blow-through plugs. And I think there's only one area or one online vendor that sells them, and then just use an air compressor to push air through the Schrader valve. Now, I do have pictures of those. I don't know if I, sent those to you, Marty, but the blow-through plugs they're an incredible $5 item to use, okay? In addition, if you don't want to spend the money on, and let's assume you have 6 feet deep end, possibly no main drain, you can get away with an air compressor, and you can, instead of using a cyclone, you can actually take a winter plug, and you can use these winter plugs in the pump housing in here, getting back to this, where you can put one winter plug here, blow through plug, another one through here, and you can actually push air that way with an air compressor, which I've also done, okay? So I'll give you a quick scenario. One of my friends purchased a house at the Jersey Shore in New Jersey, and he had a different type of cover, and we couldn't close the pool with the cyclone. There was no modified cover. So I actually worked backwards, where I took a winter plug and I put it in the steps of the pool, and I pushed air from the pool back to the equipment pad and cleared everything out, including the main drain, and everything cleared out. Eventually, then what I did was I quickly removed the blow-through plug with the Schrader valve and put another plug in, closed the pool, no problems. So again, closing the pool is nothing more than figuring out where you're going to start, what type of equipment you're going to use to move air, to remove water, and then close it.
Great. Next one would be antifreeze. Do any of you use antifreeze?
I do not use antifreeze here because I live more in the central southern Jersey part. If I was all the way up north in the New York part and the Baltimore, Maryland part, up upstate New York towards Canada, I would highly recommend antifreeze in the skimmer lines. Okay. The main drain, no. The main drain, no. You don't need it.
Sure.
Yeah, I know you had referenced it earlier. I do not currently blow out my own lines, although I may start now. Just go ahead and buy that cyclone pump. It's great to get that visual of what it all looks like. I've just never taken the effort to do it, so I certainly appreciate this myself. But I know my pool builder, not my pool builder, the guy who closes it for me, my pool guy does definitely uses antifreeze in the skimmer lines. He may put it in the main drain as well, but I would agree it's so far below line that below grade it wouldn't need it anyway.
And we do have to remember antifreeze can sort of mess with your chemistry at startup if they dump a bunch of that antifreeze into your pool. Just a reminder for anyone that uses antifreeze or has that issue. We have had many instances of very odd chemistry problems at spring startup when antifreeze has been used.
Right, and that would certainly be affected by volume of antifreeze and size of the pool. The smaller the pool, the more likely.
Right.
So Marty, one thing I would recommend is if you're going to use antifreeze in your skimmer lines, a couple things you could do is take a shop vac. And again, it all depends on your water level as well, but you could literally take a shop vac, or you can just be a little bit creative and work backwards, and you can push some of that water or the antifreeze out of the lines and just remove it somehow, or just figure out a way to get it out of there. Okay.
Problem is, I think, Dominic, what we find are people that have people come and open their pools, they don't care.
Yeah, they don't care.
So that's usually the problem. Other equipment. We had a question pop up here. Someone asked about the MPV on their sand filter. Any other equipment, things that drain, remove, etc.
Okay, on the sand filter, it's very simple. When you're done closing, remove your pressure gauge, remove your sight glass, remove your drain plug on your filter. And in addition, take your multi-port valve, and you can put it in between two settings, or you can put it into the closed or the winterize area of your MPV valve, multi-port valve, if it has one. So in between two settings, it relieves some of the pressure off, I think, the spider gasket. And that's all you have to do for that. Okay.
Other equipment, anybody, like the pumps, or do you take them in? Do you remove them? Do you just drain them? What's your normal process?
Okay, so in terms of the pump, the first couple of years, my pump was demolished, and looked horrible from the winters and no sun and underneath the snow, et cetera, et cetera. I should have covered it originally, but it's difficult because you get a lot of wind, a lot of this. So when my pump originally blew out, as you just saw before, I kept the old pump housing, and I created a dummy housing. And now what I do is, before I close it, I actually take my pump indoors and swap this out, which a lot of people can't do that. So it's 3 wires to the Intermatic timer. There's a green ground wire. If anybody needs any pictures, I could always send it. And we created a quick connect for the ground wire. So it literally takes me less than a minute to remove that old pump out, and about a minute to put this one back in. Okay. And this stays out there all winter long. I've had this pump for 3 years. The color of the gold on the Hayward pump still looks almost brand new.
Kurt, about your equipment, what do you all do?
My experience was 2 out of the first 3 winters leaving my pump outside. My pump pad is not a solid concrete. It's got river rock, and the pump was kind of not completely above the river rock. It was slightly down in the river rock, but which we resolved later. But those first couple of years, the first year the pump seized up, the bearing seized up. He came out and kind of tapped it with the hammer, and it started. It wasn't real bad. The next year did the same thing. He rebuilt it, put new bearings in it, and he said, "I'm not rebuilding it again because it's too bad." So then I brought it inside every winter thereafter, and it lasted 5 more years. And then I've since replaced my 2-speed with a variable speed. But I'm a firm believer in bringing them in areas. If you get zero moisture and and it's windy where you are, it's great, but moisture does a number on motors and bearings sitting out there for 6 months unused.
So at least on in-ground pools, and we'll get to the above ground here in a minute. It sounds like the consensus is you bring your pumps in, you leave the filters out, but drain them well, probably bring the cartridge, if it's a cartridge filter, you bring that in, the cartridges inside. And the saltwater chlorine generators, you remove and bring those inside. Is that a general consensus?
Yes, and then
Yeah,
I would
and-
recommend highly a dummy pipe, because you don't, for the salt cell, you don't want any animals or anything getting inside there and causing any problems or any friction. Marty, before I forget, I also had sent you some pictures of the modified cover, and I don't know if you want to show them as well, but we could
I
always.
think I did earlier.
Oh, you did? Okay, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Kurt.
I was just going to say, I've never removed, I mean, just as a, for better or worse, I've never removed my salt cell. I feel from a water perspective, it's vertical, so there's not going to be any water sitting in it, which is good. The line should be fairly closed off, but just practically speaking, it's been outside and I haven't had any trouble until it failed this year, just through the normal reduced capacity after 8 years. But it's absolutely a conservative thing to do to remove it.
And I think the vertical orientation of yours probably makes a big difference. And also I don't know what type I can't remember what type you have, but some of them have more electronics on board than others. So
Yeah, mine does not. It's a Hayward that does not have a lot of electronics.
Pretty much a dummy cell. Yeah. Okay, great. On to covers. We already discussed covers a little bit. The mesh cover, solid cover, auto covers. Anything more to discuss about covers? We are needing to wrap up our in-ground section here pretty quickly.
Before we discuss any type of covers, one thing I just want to mention to everyone who's eventually going to be watching this video is a couple of things. People that close your pools will charge you extra to clear out waterfalls, to clear out, other things. Guess what? It's all part of the process. In addition, most people have heaters as well. And when you clear out lines and you close your own pool, just understand one thing: the water has to run through the whole system before it gets back to the pool. So you're literally clearing all the water out of your heater. A lot of pool builders and people that close pools charge you extra for a heater. The water's running, the air is running through that anyway. So keep that in mind. You could be saving anywhere between, $200 and $500 on the pool closing here, just because you're being charged for extra for minor little things. Okay.
Right, and finding where your heater drain plugs are now when it's warm, before you get there, you can easily afterwards just pull those drain plugs out. And,
Yes, you could, but honestly, you will remove so much water out of it that you may not need to do it. We still recommend you remove the drain plugs as per manufacturer's instructions for the warranty, et cetera, et cetera.
I do have a couple questions on covers. So anything, Kurt, any discussion on covers?
My comments would just be all cover types are viable options, just depending on your scenarios. Mesh, I've opened 8 years with the mesh cover. Clear, I do close late, open early, so I'm definitely below the temperature recommendations of below 60. So all cover types and approaches do have their place. I will say, if you're going with a mesh cover, I would absolutely get the densest mesh you can, because sunlight is the enemy, especially if you're pushing those water temperatures.
Great. Couple questions on covers. One was, is a cover absolutely necessary if you have no trees around whatsoever? Is there another purpose they serve?
In my opinion, the answer is no. If you don't have a lot of debris blowing into the pool, and you can keep the pool open as late as possible, because clearly we all know when you get into October, you can run the pump 2 hours a day, 1 hour a day. December, 1 hour a day. Then you can just clear out the lines and close it. And then in the spring the same way. So the answer is no. If you have nothing that really gets into the pool and it's not crazy, then you don't need to cover your pool.
And I think the only caveat might be safety for pets, animals. Obviously, that's always the case.
Sure. Another question, when it snows, the weight of the snow pushes thousands of gallons of water out of the pool. It's initially drained to 1 inch below the tiles. Part of the problem is that the snow eventually freezes the pump and the hose in place, preventing the melt from getting pumped off. It eventually refreezes. What's the best way to avoid this situation?
Okay, so I don't have this type of situation, but personally, what I would do is, so you're saying that the snow and everything freezes and the pump freezes.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the answer is that you don't let the pump freeze. You put it on there when it needs to be pumped off and you take it off after it's pumped off.
That's it. Bring it indoors.
And that's so cover pumps, if used, do take some effort. They should not be a set and forget. I think that's probably the best discussion there. So
And
great.
one other thing I'll mention is even though you close a pool during the winter, you know, spend a few minutes every couple of weeks, go outside and just double check everything, make sure nothing's out of the ordinary. It's a lot better to fix something beforehand than not afterwards.
Ladders, Dominic, you already mentioned ladders. I don't know that there's probably much else to be discussed there. Basically, you obviously, if you're covering it, you got to remove them. There's the processes as you described before on ladders. So let's jump to above ground. Jonathan, you're on the spotlight here for about the next, hopefully not much more than 5 to 7 minutes. And from how I know you close your pool, it probably won't take that long. So water level, go ahead.
Yeah, so first off, I did want to just mention to people to make them aware that I do have an Intex pool. So certain aspects of closing might be a little different, but I think in general, it's all fairly much the same. So for water level, I drained my pool about 4 to 6 inches below the lowest, the inlets to my pump, which they're only like a foot from the top. So that means I drained maybe about 1.5 feet of water from my pool. And that was about it. So that seems to be the consensus, is just drain the water down below, you know, a few inches below your openings.
So do you leave the openings open if you get rain or whatever in it and it builds back up, it will drain out? Is that how the process works?
Yes, I did leave my openings open. In the spring, I did notice all the snow throughout the winter had built up, you know, raised the water level of the pool, and it was, as it started melting, it was melting out of those openings.
Great. And somebody had just recently posted on the forum about some kind of a pool that has an air ring around it that supports it, and apparently those should not be left up over winter. I know you don't have any information on that, but
No, I don't have any. I saw that thread a little bit this morning, and yeah, it doesn't seem the best idea to me to leave one of those up over the winter.
right.
Yeah,
What
this
about-
would be.
What about your equipment? What do you do with your service equipment?
So anything that's in the water, you want to take out, obviously. So your ladders, you got to pull out your ladder. If you have anything draped over the side, I know that there's some above ground pool lights that drape over the side of the pool. You'll want to pull that out. I have the Intex lights that for the Intex pool, since they don't have metal wall, they actually magnetically couple from the outside of the pool to the inside. You'd want to pull those out as well. As far as the rest of the equipment, then after the water's been drained, assuming you have flexible hoses, you just remove all your flex lines, drain them, store those somewhere. I pulled my pump inside for the winter time. Obviously, you have to drain your, if you had a sand filter, you're going to have to drain that just like they previously described for an in-ground pool. I'm not familiar with other types of filters. Presumably, especially like the smaller, some of the Intex pools come with, if you have that, a smaller one that comes with a small cartridge filter, it should be easy enough to pull that inside for the winter.
What about a cover? I know you don't cover yours. Do you see any reason to cover it?
I think a lot of the reasonings could be what was, mentioned earlier, would be if you keeping the leaves out of the pool, should be a lot easier to keep the pool water clear throughout the winter. I think that would be about it. Also keeping the sunlight out, that would be an advantage. Downside is you have to deal with a cover. But if you don't use a cover, Like they said, with all the sunlight, with leaves getting in the pool, you're gonna have to close late, as late as you can, open, as soon as there's no more freezing in the springtime, and you're gonna have to, run a robot or net leaves out of the pool,
Right.
in the interim.
Or maintenance, I guess, is your discussion. The cover is kind of a maintenance, can save on some maintenance.
Yeah, there's not like a safety aspect for an in-ground pool.
Right. Any other items around an above ground pool that you can think of?
Not really. At this point, they're
It's pretty straight up.
listening to all the in-ground stuff.
Right.
Well, actually, one other thing I can think of is a lot of people will upgrade their plumbing to hard lines. If you do that, you're going to have to blow out those lines, just like we're talking about for the in-ground pools, though it should be a bit easier.
Good catch. Good catch. Very good. Okay, so now in general, for all three of you, during winter, do you monitor anything, and what do you monitor, and any intervention?
The only thing that I do in the winter, as I mentioned previously, because I have a solid tarp, is I'll go and I'll remove the leaves there, and I'll just make sure that, I'm not losing too much water. If I see that the cover's sagging a lot, because you have to give it a lot of slack, something's wrong. Then you have to basically say to yourself, because you don't want to lose all the water through the winter and have to have somebody come out here and try to figure out what's wrong with it, because you may have a tough time.
Sure. Kurt?
For my winter process, that mainly involves, I have a mesh cover on a concrete pool. So that mainly involves checking the water level to make sure that it hasn't, to make sure it's, it always rises during the winter. In Maryland, we'll get, 20 inches of rain, 20 inches of precipitation during the period my pool is covered, closed rather. So I'll stick a pump in. Usually I close at the beginning of November, mid-December. The pool's not, if it even freezes, it's certainly not frozen by the middle of December, and I'll pump it back down to my starting level. If it's not frozen and it's in mid-season, I might throw it in again one time. Just depends on the amount of precipitation, but my goal is always to keep the water, any potential freezing water, off of the tile. Well, I will say though, once I get to February, we start getting some warmer days and warmer temperatures. I know the pool water is not going to freeze once we get past a certain point, and I don't worry about pumping it out anymore. I just start letting that rainwater accumulate, and that's less I have to add. I do not check pH or the chlorine levels during the winter. I did for the first couple of years. It'll make you worry a little bit on the pH sometimes if your pool water rises, pool temp or pool pH rises. I don't check anything now. I've developed the comfort level that it's going to be clear and I'm not going to have any issues in the spring. So I don't do any monitoring other than water level.
Right. A person just posted up here a mesh cover on a fiberglass pool, which I know you all don't have. I do, but if it freezes here, I'm moving. How high can you let the water go? I've been told to keep it below the coping.
I would think it would be the same as a vinyl pool for a fiberglass pool. Wouldn't that be correct, Dominic?
Yes, I would say that. I wouldn't be too worried about a fiberglass pool.
I think the main thing about a liner pool, and that would include an above ground pool, Jonathan, once you get ice in there, don't mess with it because it can tear the liner or it can tear the vinyl, correct?
I assume so. What's neat about the safety cover, I'm sorry, the solid tarp, is that it goes underneath, around the pool, and it kind of protects the liner a little bit. But I've actually seen water freeze, and I peeked underneath, and believe it or not, it doesn't really butt up against the liner because I peeked underneath there. So very rarely have I seen a pool in New Jersey that has been, cut from the ice. However, don't mess with the ice, as Marty just said. If you get ice, leave it alone. It's going to expand. It'll do what it has to do. Okay. Don't try to break it. Don't do anything. Okay.
All right. Jonathan, anything from you on intervention?
So this last winter, my pool froze across the top in November, and didn't thaw until March. So
Your intervention is ice skating.
I did not try to do that, but I
Like
was
I
worried
said,
about the pool flexing. I thought about it, but I was worried about the pool flexing and possibly damaging the liner. But
I've lived in those places. I don't do that anymore. Great. Before we wrap up, one last question I see here on chat, and we're not going to be able to get into this because it does add a lot of complexity to closing a pool, and that person needs to come on the forum and have a discussion. Tips on if your equipment pad is below the water level on an in-ground gunite pool. I think it would add a lot of complexity, although technically the blowing out process should stay the same, but I would think you'd have to take some additional precautions.
So Marty, I'll interject here. What I would do is I would work backwards because water clearly is going to be draining towards the equipment pad. So a couple things you could do is, you'll have to spend a few dollars, buy yourself the blow through plugs, okay? And use those inside the return lines and also inside the skimmers and move the water backwards because it'll drain naturally, okay, because of gravity, and that will help protect it. Okay, that's what I would do.
Great. So what I would like to offer now is any general discussion wrap up. We have 3 minutes to our time commitment. Anybody have any other items to discuss before we wrap up here?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything. The only thing is, if anybody needs any advice, please go back to the forum. There's plenty of articles, plenty of information. Okay, we're all here to help everyone.
Kurt?
My comment, Dominic's trying to build up my confidence to blow out my own lines this year. So we'll see if that happens. But just to let people know that the purpose of this is to educate you, and whether you decide to do it yourself or you decide to continue having somebody blow out your lines, we're always about education and knowledge. The more educated, knowledgeable you are about your pool, the less of a mystery it'll be. And if you do have somebody blow it out, you'll be able to understand what they're doing and maybe save yourself a few dollars here and there with some of the suggestions that Dominic mentioned as well.
Jonathan, anything to wrap up?
I don't think so. Just one last thing. Don't wait too long to winterize.
I can understand that, especially in your area. My goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would like to echo the three gentlemen. I would like to thank them all for joining me this morning. But I also would like to echo that there's a wiki article, there's a great article in Pool School for both above ground and in-ground pools. There's also Dominic's thread and lots of other threads. So, and I believe Dominic's thread is referenced in the wiki article. So please, anyone that has any more questions or wants anything, please go there. So at this point, I'm going to wrap up the recording, and I thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.